Okay, so you know how you always hear that a lot of Muslims are like, quote unquote, nominal Muslims?
Right.
Like they, maybe show up for the big holidays, but
Yeah.
like not really practicing in a super serious way.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to look at a source today called Misunderstanding Sharia Compliance. Are they really nominal Muslims? And it like really pushes back against that idea.
Oh, interesting.
So we're going to deep dive on that today, and I am super curious to see what like rukhsa and Azima have to do with all of this.
Yeah, those are key concepts in this whole discussion for sure. And it really challenges, I think, a lot of conventional wisdom on this.
Okay, so first off, like how does this source define that whole nominal Islam thing?
Well, it basically lays out this idea that there's this perception that a good chunk of Muslims are only kind of like surface level about their faith.
Okay.
Beyond, maybe a few rituals here and there.
Right.
And then we get into these two ideas, rukhsa and azima.
Okay, yeah, let's break those down.
All right, so think of azima as like the strict path within Sharia. It's for those who are really going for like the maximum observance in all parts of their life.
Gotcha.
But then you have rukhsa, which is like this really interesting counterpoint.
Okay.
It's basically this built-in allowance within Islamic doctrine for flexibility.
Oh, interesting.
Like, some leniency in how you fulfill certain obligations.
So like if it's too difficult, you can kind of like...
Exactly. It's like if strictly following the rules would cause a real hardship.
Okay.
You're given this space to adapt. And that's the key insight from the source.
I see.
What we might perceive from the outside as nominal behavior.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not super outwardly pious or they're kind of adapting to the rules.
Yeah.
That could actually be a conscious choice to follow rukhsa, which is a totally legit way of practicing.
Wow. So it's not that they're not serious about their faith. They're just like choosing this other path.
Exactly. And that's a huge difference in how we understand this whole thing.
That's really fascinating. So then the source goes on to talk about jihad, which we always hear about in the context of violence and conflict.
Right. Always seems to be the headline news.
But this source points to reliance of the traveler and specifically mentions 09.0.
Yeah.
Apparently that lays out a much broader definition of jihad.
Way broader. It's not just about fighting.
Oh, wow.
It gets really nuanced.
So how does that change things?
Well, the source highlights that reliance actually identifies something like 14 different types of jihad.
Wow, 14.
Yeah, like you have the internal struggle against your own desires. That's a form of jihad.
Oh, interesting.
You have acts of charity, even spreading the message of Islam peacefully, like through teaching or just talking to people about it.
So like someone who volunteers a ton in their community, that could be a type of jihad.
Exactly.
Huh, so it's not always about like picking up arms.
No, and that's where our whole idea of who's a committed Muslim gets kind of flipped on its head.
I see what you mean.
Like someone we might call nominal because they're not, engaging in violent activities.
Right.
They could be deeply involved in these other forms of jihad.
Right, and we might totally miss that.
We might completely underestimate how seriously they take their faith because their focus is on these nonviolent expressions of it.
So someone dedicated to their community through charity could be actively participating in jihad.
Totally. Even if they're like a million miles away from any militant groups.
It's like a whole different way of looking at things.
It really is. And another crucial point from the source is that the people who are really following Azma,
like that strict path.
yeah, they're living by this whole legal and spiritual code.
Right.
That shapes their lives in a huge way.
I see.
Even if we don't always recognize it as strict religious observance.
Interesting.
Like their commitment is real, even if it doesn't fit the most rigid interpretation.
Okay.
And it's important to remember, too, that Sharia does allow for an escalation of practices.
Oh.
So that could potentially include violent jihad, depending on how people interpret the context and the circumstances they're facing.
I see.
It's not like a static thing.
Right. It can evolve.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. So let's talk about Zakat then.
Okay.
Which is the mandatory charitable giving in Islam.
Right. It's one of the 5 pillars.
Quran 9.60 mentions it, and this source links that to jihad too.
Yeah, and this is where things get like really interesting because it shows how something that seems like a routine religious duty can have these much broader implications.
So how does that link work?
Well, the source points us back to Reliance H8.17 this time.
Okay.
And apparently it says that you can use Zakat money to support those fighting for Allah.
Oh, wow.
And that can include things like providing for soldiers, and getting them the equipment they need for conflict.
So even if someone is like outwardly less strict in their personal life, maybe fitting that nominal description,
Right.
they could still be indirectly supporting activities that are considered jihad through their zakat.
Yeah, because it's like a pillar of their faith.
Right.
So they're going to be giving zakat, and that money could be channeled towards efforts that are considered jihad under Sharia.
That's a really important point to consider because it's not always obvious, right?
No, it's not. And it raises this question of like, if someone is consistently donating to religious charities, but they seem otherwise inactive,
Yeah.
how do we really assess their potential connection to these broader movements?
Right. You can't just make assumptions.
Exactly. We got to be careful about generalizations.
Absolutely. Okay, so now let's get into this concept of taqiyya.
Okay, yeah, that's a big one.
For those who might not know, what is that and how does it play into this whole conversation about how committed someone seems to be to their faith?
So Taqiyya, as the source explains it, citing Reliance R 8.2,
Okay.
is essentially a permissible form of dissimulation within Islam.
Dissimulation.
Yeah, it's like this allowance to conceal your beliefs or your affiliations, or even to straight up deceive people. But it's only for the purpose of protecting yourself or the interests of Islam.
So it's like a strategic thing.
Exactly.
Interesting. So how does that connect to everything else we've been talking about?
Well, the source ties this to situations where you might see Muslims publicly denying any involvement with or support for jihad,
Oh, I see.
especially online or in other public settings.
So on social media?
Yeah, and the argument is that those denials might not necessarily mean they're truly opposed to such activities.
Oh, wow.
It could be an act of taqiyya, which is allowed under certain interpretations of Sharia.
So they might be saying one thing, but actually believing or supporting something else?
That's the suggestion, yeah.
Wow.
And the source also points out that according to Sharia 08.1,
Okay.
openly opposing jihad could lead to being labeled an apostate.
Oh, so it's risky to speak out against it?
It can be, yeah. So staying silent or even denying involvement doesn't automatically mean they're not committed to their faith.
So it's a way of protecting themselves.
Exactly. And it makes it really hard to know what to make of their public statements.
That's so complex. It makes you wonder how much our own biases are affecting how we see all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. The source talks about that too.
Right, our desire to see a moderate majority within Islam.
Yeah, we want to believe that most Muslims are peaceful and reject extremism.
Exactly.
And that desire can really color how we interpret things.
Right. We might only see what we want to see.
And the source suggests that this can blind us to what's actually going on with their beliefs and practices.
Ah, I see.
And then there's the media too.
Oh, yeah. The media definitely shapes how we view things.
Totally. The source uses the 2015 Paris attacks as an example,
Okay.
saying that Western media tends to focus heavily on these instances of violent jihad.
Which makes sense. It's big news.
Right. But the source argues that this focus can create a really limited and maybe even distorted view.
It's we're getting a very specific snapshot, but not the whole picture.
Exactly. And we end up overlooking all those other forms of jihad we talked about.
The charity, the community service.
All of that. But at the same time, the source warns against going too far in the other direction.
Labeling everyone a potential jihadi.
Right, because that's just as bad.
So it's about finding that middle ground.
It's all about nuance. The doctrine itself, with rukhsa, allows for a huge range of ways to practice.
Right. Some people are more strict, some are more flexible.
And those who follow the more flexible path might not feel compelled to engage in violence unless very specific conditions are met.
Right. And their zakat could be going to a whole range of causes.
Exactly. So the key takeaway is that unless we have clear evidence of specific actions.
Actual proof of funding terrorist groups or something?
Exactly.
Right.
We can't just assume someone is violent based on how strictly they seem to practice their faith.
Right.
The source keeps emphasizing that we need to go back to the original texts like Reliance of the Traveler 09.0.
To really understand.
Yeah, to get a more complete picture of what's allowed within their belief system.
This all leads to this big dilemma the source lays out.
Which is,
If Muslims are following Sharia, whether it's through Azima or rukhsa,
right.
and considering things like zakat and taqiyya,
Yeah.
then maybe their lack of participation in violent jihad isn't them being apathetic or nominal.
Yeah.
Maybe it's actually a form of obedience within their own doctrine.
That's the challenge to our assumptions right there.
It's we think they're not committed because they're not doing certain things.
But actually...
But their lack of action could be their own form of commitment.
Exactly. And that's a really hard pill to swallow for a lot of people.
Definitely. And the source ends by saying that we need to be rational and objective.
Oh, absolutely.
We have to move past our preconceived ideas and really study their doctrine.
And look at their actions.
To really get it.
To see what's actually happening without all our biases getting in the way.
It's like we might want to believe that most Muslims are nominal.
Yeah, because it makes us feel better.
But that could just be us simplifying a really complex reality.
It could be wishful thinking.
Yeah, and this source argues that a lot of Muslims are deeply engaged with Sharia.
Whether it's through a stricter or more flexible approach.
And that their support for jihad could take many different forms.
From direct involvement to indirect support through zakat, or even silence or denial, potentially enabled by taqiyya.
And all of that can be consistent with their own religious doctrine.
It's not necessarily hypocrisy or a lack of faith.
So we really need to look beyond surface appearances.
And dig deeper.
Into the actual teachings of Sharia.
To understand what's going on.
It's about getting informed, not just relying on what we think we know.
Exactly. We got to go to source.
Yeah. So like thinking about all this flexibility within Sharia and all these different forms of jihad.
It's a lot to process.
It makes you wonder how understanding these doctrines could change how we see everything happening in Muslim communities.
There's a whole new lens.
It's like this deep dive is just the beginning.
Yeah. It gives you a lot to think about.
Yeah.